I've talked to many people through the years who've been disappointed because they've asked God to speak to them and they feel like God never did. Some of those people even became atheists because during that time in their lives when they really wanted to know God, when they were seeking Him and asking Him to speak, they felt like God never answered. For other people, maybe they're just frustrated by what seems like God's lack of communication. They sit down to pray and they feel like they're doing all the talking and like God isn't talking back. So I wanted to make this video to talk about some of the ways that God speaks. And if you're one of those people who's concluded that God doesn't exist because He didn't answer you in the way that you expected and hoped, I want to offer you a different possibility. What if God just doesn't communicate in the ways that you expected Him to? Many people I know are expecting God to speak in an audible voice. And I think that's what I expected when I first started getting to know God. I thought that He would speak to me in a clear voice and I would know it's Him. Well, it's been many years of communication with God, and I've never heard God speak in an audible voice like that. And most people I know haven't heard that either. I have heard some stories of people who've heard God speak in an audible voice, but I think it's fair to say that God usually doesn't speak to us that way. And there's a good reason for that. Imagine if you were praying and all of a sudden you did hear an audible voice. Wouldn't that be a little bit scary? Might make you wonder if you have a mental disorder. Would you be sure that that was God? Or would you be afraid that you might be going insane? For those who think that if God spoke to you in an audible voice, then you would for sure know He exists and then you would believe in Him, I don't think that's true. I think you would be stuck with the exact same doubt because you would always be wondering, was it really God speaking or do I have a mental disorder? So I think God has ways of speaking to us that don't make us afraid and don't make us feel like we have a mental disorder. Here are some of the ways that God speaks. God speaks through moments of beauty. Beauty is the universal language. It's the universal way that God speaks to us. No matter who you are or where you live, we have all experienced moments of beauty. For some, it may be a moment in nature where the waves are crashing on the beach, or seeing a beautiful view from a mountaintop, or even seeing pictures of distant galaxies. For some people, their moments of beauty are the closeness, the experience of closeness with another person. For some people, it's beautiful music. In those moments of beauty, God is speaking to us. God speaks in and through beauty. And that's something, a way that God reveals Himself to everyone. Sometimes God speaks through other people and through circumstances. Sometimes a person will come along at exactly the right time and say the thing that you exactly need to hear in that moment. And sometimes that person doesn't even realize that they're bringing you a message from God, but they just say something that you needed to hear to keep you hopeful about your life. Other times, people may hear a message and know it's from God and give you a message from God that way. So sometimes God speaks through circumstances. Maybe you're praying for a new job and then the next day you get a job offer. I know one time my friend told me that she needed a bed. She had been sleeping on an air mattress and it broke and she was sleeping on the hard floor. And that same day, I got a call from somebody who asked me, do I need a bed? And so, like, God answered in that circumstance. Now, some people will say, oh, that's just coincidence. And it could be. But you know, when you get to know God, those coincidences start stacking up. So God does speak through circumstances. Another way God speaks is through images or thoughts that come to your mind. Now, if you sit quietly and ask God to speak to you, images may come to your mind that you could easily brush off and dismiss as just your imagination. And I think often when God is speaking to people, they don't recognize it because it is from their own imagination, or it does sound like a thought from their own mind. But God uses the tools that He built you with. God gave you a mind that can see pictures and that can form thoughts. And God speaks to you in those ways. So often when I hear from God, I hear a thought that sounds like just my own voice in my head. But I've learned over time that when God is speaking to me, there's often a feeling of peace and joy that comes along with that thought or with that image. But learning to hear from God in that way is a little bit difficult. It's kind of like babies learning how to walk. A baby doesn't learn how to walk in a day. It takes time for a baby to learn how to control his muscles and learn how to balance. And so in just the same way, it takes time to learn to distinguish when God is speaking to you through a thought or image and when it's your own mind. And sometimes it can still be confusing for me. It's not the most reliable way to hear from God. So there is a much more reliable way to hear from God. It's a very simple way that God has given us, and that is through the Bible. This is the most reliable way to hear from God. If you want to know for sure that you're hearing what God has to say, read what the Bible says. The Bible tells us who God is, and it speaks to us about who we are to God and what God's plans are for us and how He wants us to live. So anyone who says, God has never spoken to me, that is strange to me, because if you read the Bible, God is speaking to you already, and He gave you this as a reliable way. And it's through the words of the Bible that we encounter God's most important way of speaking to us. The ultimate way that God has spoken to all of us is through His Son. In Hebrews, in the Bible, it says, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, and through whom also He made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being. Jesus is the most important way that God has spoken to us. If you want to know exactly what God says to you, look at the Son. Look at what the Son did for you. Jesus laid down His life for you. This is the ultimate way that God could have spoken to you. The Bible says, for God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son. If you've ever wondered, does God love me? What is God's desire? What is His disposition toward me? Look at the ultimate expression of Himself through the Son. He willingly laid down His life for you. So God has spoken once and for all. his feelings and his desire for you, and that is love. Thanks for watching. God bless you.